Nkem sat at the edge of the wooden stool, her eyes darting toward the door, her breath shallow. She could hear her parents laughing in the courtyard, completely unaware of what had just happened in the room she shared with her brother, Obinna. Her hands trembled as she pulled the wrapper tighter around her chest, trying to steady her thoughts. Obinna lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling, his expression blank. Outside, their mother, Ifeoma, called for them. Nkem. Obinna. Come and eat before the food gets cold. Neither of them moved. Ifeoma and her husband, were like most parents in Umudak village, too busy with their daily struggles to notice the little things happening under their own roof. They were not cruel parents, nor were they particularly negligent. They simply assumed that because their children were growing under the same roof, they would naturally grow up well. He spent most of his time at his palm wine tapper's hut or in the company of other men in the village square, discussing things that never truly concerned his household. Ifeoma, on the other hand, was a trader. She sold vegetables and dried fish in the market, leaving home at dawn and returning just before dusk. With no one watching closely, Nkem and Obinna had grown up like weeds, untended, unpruned. At first, their bond was harmless. They were only 2 years apart, after all. They played together, fetched water together, and shared the same sleeping space in their small hut. Their parents never saw the need to separate them. They are children, Ifeoma would say. Brother and sister. What is there to fear? But time had moved quickly. Obinna was now 17. Nkem was 15. And suddenly, something had changed between them. It began subtly. Obinna would watch Nkem longer than he should. He would get irritated when she talked about the boys who tried to befriend her. He would make excuses to be alone with her. And Nkem, naive and unguarded, never questioned it. She trusted her brother more than anyone else. That night, something had happened. Something neither of them had the words to describe. Now, they sat in silence, pretending it had not. Days passed, and their home continued as usual. Is came back from his palm wine tapping, half drunk but still strong enough to discipline them if needed. Ifeoma busied herself with her market trade, reminding Nkem to cook and sweep but never asking if she was happy. The children did their chores without complaint. Nkem avoided Obinna's eyes. Obinna grew more possessive of her. Then, one evening, the village's talking drum echoed through the compound. A messenger had arrived. Nkem, Obinna. Your uncle, Ozoemena, has sent for you. Ozoemena, their father's elder brother, was a respected elder. He rarely summoned anyone unless it was important. When they arrived at his compound, he studied them for a long time before speaking. You two have grown. Soon, Nkem will be of age to marry. And Obinna, you will be a man. Obinna's jaw tightened. Nkem fidgeted. You must conduct yourselves well, Ozoemena continued. The eyes of the gods are everywhere. Do not bring shame to your lineage. The words settled heavily between them. That night, back in their small hut, Nkem whispered, "Do you think he knows?" Obinna's face darkened. Nobody knows. And nobody will ever know. Nkem shivered, not from cold but from something far worse, the feeling that this was only the beginning. Nkem woke up gasping. Beads of sweat clung to her forehead despite the cold harmattan breeze filtering through the cracks in their hut. The dream had felt too real, Obinna's face too close, his breath too hot, his grip too tight. But it was just a dream. Or was it? She turned her head slightly. Obinna lay beside her, his chest rising and falling in steady breaths. His face was calm, but she knew better. Something had shifted between them. Days turned into weeks. The incident was never spoken of, but it lingered in the air, thick like the smoke from their mother's cooking fire. Obinna had become more watchful. Nkem felt his presence even when he wasn't looking at her. One evening, she sat outside, peeling cassava for dinner, when she heard footsteps behind her. "You've been avoiding me," Obinna's voice was low, accusing. Nkem didn't turn around. "I've been busy." "You're lying." She swallowed, keeping her eyes on the cassava. Obinna crouched beside her. "Are you ashamed of me?" Her hands shook slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." He grabbed the knife from her hand and tossed it aside. "Stop pretending." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw something she couldn't understand. It wasn't anger. It wasn't affection. It was something in between, something dangerous. Before she could respond, their mother's voice cut through the tension. "Nkem, come inside and wash the plates." She sprang to her feet and hurried inside, leaving Obinna staring after her. Their mother, Ifeoma, never noticed. She never noticed how stiff Nkem became whenever Obinna was near. She never noticed how Obinna's eyes followed his sister like a shadow. She was too busy. Too tired. Too unaware. Their father, was no different. He barely spoke to his children except to back orders or give punishment. He was a man of the village, more concerned with his reputation than the lives under his roof. And so, the silence continued. Then came the night of the moon festival. Nkem was excited. The festival was the one time young girls were allowed to dance freely in the village square. The air would be filled with the sound of drums, the scent of roasted meat, and the laughter of boys eager to impress. She wore her best wrapper and a string of beads around her neck. Her mother clicked her tongue in approval before sending her off with a warning. "Come back before the moon is high in the sky." She nodded and ran off, her heart light for the first time in weeks. But she never noticed the figure that followed her into the night. The festival was everything she had hoped for. The drums were loud, the laughter contagious. She danced until her feet ached. Then she met Chibuzo. He was tall, with a confident smile and eyes that held mischief. They talked, laughed, and before long, he reached for her hand. It was innocent. It should have been innocent. But when she felt a piercing stare from across the square, her stomach dropped. She turned slowly. Obinna stood in the shadows, watching. His fists were clenched. His jaw tight. His expression unreadable. Fear gripped her. She pulled her hand away from Chibuzo. I have to go." "Nkem, wait." She didn't. She pushed past the crowd and ran, her heart pounding, her feet barely touching the ground. When she reached home, she turned to bolt the door behind her. But Obinna was already there. Standing in the doorway. Blocking her way. Trapping her. "You think you can escape me?" His voice was quiet, too quiet. Nkem's throat tightened. "Obinna, please." He stepped closer. "You belong to me, Nkem. Not to them. Not to him." A shiver ran down her spine. Outside, their parents laughed, oblivious. Inside, Nkem realized something terrifying. Obinna was no longer just her brother. He was something else. Something worse. Nkem sat motionless on the mat, her back pressed against the rough mud wall of their hut. Outside, the night was alive with the distant sounds of the festival, laughter, and drums. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Obinna hadn't moved since she had scrambled away from him. He stood by the door, staring at her, his breathing slow but deep. "You ran from me," he finally said. Nkem's fingers dug into the fabric of her wrapper. "You were scaring me." Obinna took a step forward, and she pressed herself harder against the wall. "You were with that boy. He was just talking to me." Obinna scoffed. "Just talking." He took another step, his shadow swallowing her in the dim lantern light. I saw the way he looked at you. The way you smiled at him. That's not wrong, Obinna. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I have the right to. You have no right. She flinched. Nobody else should look at you like that, he continued, his tone quieter now, but no less heavy. Nobody else should touch you. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself. You're my brother. And that means you're mine, he said. The words felt final, like a curse settling over her skin. For the first time, Nkem felt something worse than fear. She felt trapped. The next morning, she went about her chores as if nothing had happened. She cooked, fetched water, and swept the compound while their mother prepared for another day at the market. If Obinna had anything more to say about the night before, he didn't show it. But his eyes never left her. Their father, left for the palm wine tappers hut early as usual. Ifeoma hurried off to the market shortly after. By mid-morning, Nkem was alone with Obinna. She planned it carefully. While he was inside, she snatched a basket and pretended to head for the stream. But the moment she was out of sight, she changed direction, heading straight for Chibuzo's compound. Chibuzo's mother welcomed her warmly. Oh, Nkem, my daughter. What brings you here? She hesitated, glancing around. I wanted to see Chibuzo. The woman smiled knowingly. He went to the farm early. You just missed him. Should I send him to your house later? Nkem's stomach tightened. No, she blurted out, too fast. I mean, no, thank you. I'll see him another time. The woman gave her a curious look but said nothing. Nkem thanked her and left, her mind racing. She needed to find a way to speak to Chibuzo, alone. By the time she got back home, Obinna was waiting. Where did you go? He asked, his voice calm but firm. She held up the empty basket. To the stream. Obinna's eyes scanned her face, searching. I checked the stream. You weren't there. Nkem's breath hitched. Maybe you didn't see me. Silence. Then, Obinna stepped closer. Do not lie to me again, Nkem. She lowered her gaze. That night, she lay awake long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. She had to find a way out of this. The next day, she got her chance. Their mother sent her to the market to buy some ingredients. It was a small freedom, but Nkem knew she had to use it well. She found Chibuzo near the meat sellers, helping his mother. When he saw her, he smiled. You ran off so fast last night. I was worried. Nkem glanced around before grabbing his wrist. I need to talk to you. Something in her eyes made his smile fade. Come. They walked a short distance away, stopping near an empty stall. Nkem, what's wrong? She hesitated, unsure of how to explain something so unnatural. It's Obinna, she finally whispered. He is not acting like my brother anymore. Chibuzo's brows furrowed. What do you mean? She opened her mouth, then shut it. How could she say it out loud? How could she explain the way her own brother's eyes followed her, the way he spoke to her like she belonged to him? Chibuzo studied her face, concern growing. Did he do something to you? Nkem swallowed. Not yet. But I'm scared, Chibuzo. He won't let me be. He won't even let me talk to you. Chibuzo's expression hardened. That's not right. You're not his property. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. You don't have to go back there. Come to my mother. She'll. No. The voice came from behind them. Nkem froze. Slowly, she turned. Obinna stood a few feet away, his fist clenched, his breathing heavy. You lied to me again, Nkem. His voice was quiet, dangerous. Chibuzo stepped in front of her. She can talk to whoever she wants, Obinna. You can't control her. Obinna's gaze didn't shift. Stay out of this. Chibuzo squared his shoulders. Or what? For a moment, nobody moved. The market noise faded into the background. Then Obinna spoke, his voice chillingly calm. She's coming home with me. Chibuzo shook his head. Not if she doesn't want to. Obinna's lip curled. You don't understand, do you? Then he turned to Nkem, his expression unreadable. Tell him, Nkem. Her throat dried up. Tell him what? Obinna took a step closer. Tell him who you belong to. Nkem's stomach twisted. Obinna, please. Tell him. Tears stung her eyes. Chibuzo grabbed her wrist. You don't have to listen to him. Come with me. Obinna's eyes darkened. Let go of her. The tension snapped. Chibuzo pulled her forward. Obinna lunged. And the market erupted into chaos. Nkem could still hear the echoes of the market scene in her head. Obinna's anger. Chibuzo's concern. Uncle Ozoemena's sharp voice ordering them home. Obinna hadn't said a word to her since then, but she could feel the tension in the air, thick like an approaching storm. She avoided him as best as she could, spending more time around their mother or escaping to the stream whenever she had the chance. But she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. One evening, as she helped her mother prepare dinner, Ifeoma sighed, shaking her head. Nkem, you've been acting strangely these days. What's wrong? Nkem stirred the soup absent-mindedly. Nothing, Mama. Her mother studied her for a moment. Are you sure? You and Obinna hardly talk anymore. Nkem forced a small smile. We're just growing up, Mama. That's all. Ifeoma nodded slowly but didn't push further. She was tired. Always tired. Their father sat in his usual spot outside, chewing on a piece of kola nut and staring at nothing. He barely noticed them. Nkem wanted to tell her mother everything. She wanted to scream that something wasn't right, that Obinna wasn't acting like her brother anymore. But she didn't. Because she knew Ifeoma wouldn't listen. The next morning, their mother sent her to the stream to fetch water. As she filled her pot, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned quickly. Chibuzo. Her heart pounded. What are you doing here? He smiled gently. I came to see you. Nkem glanced around. You shouldn't. Obinna. I don't care about Obinna, Chibuzo interrupted. I care about you. She looked down, feeling a lump form in her throat. It's not that simple. It is, he insisted. You don't belong to him, Nkem. You have your own life. Tears stung her eyes. I don't know how to fix this. Chibuzo reached for her hand. Let me help you. She hesitated, her heart racing. But before she could respond, a shadow fell over them. They both turned. Obinna. He stood a few feet away, his face unreadable, his posture tense. You lied to me again, he said quietly. Nkem swallowed hard. Chibuzo squared his shoulders. She doesn't have to explain herself to you, Obinna. Obinna's expression didn't change. She's coming home. Chibuzo glanced at Nkem. Do you want to go? Nkem's lips parted, but no words came out. She was frozen, trapped between them. Obinna held out his hand. Come, Nkem. Her fingers trembled. Chibuzo took a deep breath. You have a choice, Nkem. She looked at them both, her mind spinning. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. Not toward Chibuzo. Not toward Obinna. She picked up her water pot and walked away. Alone. That night, Obinna didn't speak to her. He barely looked at her. But Nkem knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Nkem thought that after the scene at the stream, things would settle. That maybe, just maybe, Obinna would let things be. She was wrong. For days, the silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. Obinna didn't speak to her, but his eyes followed her everywhere. Every time she glanced in his direction, she found him watching. Waiting. One evening, their mother called for them. Nkem. Obinna. Come here. They both stepped into the hut, standing before Ifeoma as she set down her bowl of freshly peeled cassava. I've been thinking, she began, rubbing her forehead. Nkem, you've grown. You're a young woman now. It's time to start thinking of your future. Nkem's stomach tightened. Obinna stiffened beside her. You've been spending time with Chibuzo, haven't you? Ifeoma asked. Nkem's hands trembled. Mama, He's a good boy, Ifeoma continued. His family is respected. If he's interested in you, we should speak to his parents. Obinna's jaw clenched. Nkem's breath caught in her throat. Their mother was suggesting marriage. That night, Nkem sat outside under the moon, hugging her knees. She barely noticed Obinna stepping out of the hut until he spoke. You didn't say anything to her. She tensed. What was I supposed to say? That you don't want him. She turned to him, eyes wide. I never said that. Obinna's voice dropped. You don't belong to him, Nkem. Her hands curled into fist. I am not a thing to be owned. He took a step forward. I won't let this happen. You don't have a choice, she shot back. Silence. Then, in a voice so quiet it sent chills down her spine, he said, we'll see about that. Days passed, and the talks of marriage grew louder. Chibuzo's family sent word. Their father, nodded in approval. Ifeoma smiled, pleased. Everything was falling into place. Except for Obinna. He barely spoke. He barely ate. Then, one evening, he vanished. At first, no one noticed. Maybe he had gone to the farm. Maybe he had gone to see his friends. But when night fell and he still wasn't home, worry crept in. Ifeoma paced. Where could he be? He's grunted. He'll come back. But Nkem wasn't so sure. Something felt wrong. The next morning, just as the sun rose, Obinna returned. Dust covered his feet. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes, dark and unreadable. Ifeoma rushed to him. Where have you been? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked straight at Nkem. And smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Nkem's blood turned cold. She didn't know where he had gone. But she knew, deep in her bones. He had done something. Nkem couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Obinna's sudden disappearance. The strange smile on his face when he returned. The way he carried himself, as if he knew something she didn't. She wanted to ask him where he had gone. What he had done. But she was afraid of the answer. The morning after his return, everything seemed normal. Their mother hummed as she pounded yam. Their father sat outside, sharpening his machete. But when Chibuzo's mother arrived at their compound, her face was tight with worry. We need to talk, she said. Nkem's heart pounded. Ifeoma wiped her hands on her wrapper. Is everything all right? Chibuzo's mother hesitated. Then, in a low voice, she said, the marriage discussions, we have to put them on hold. Silence. Why? Ifeoma asked, frowning. Chibuzo's mother glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening. Then she sighed. Something has happened. Nkem's hands went cold. What is it? Ifeoma pressed. Chibuzo's mother hesitated again, then finally said, Chibuzo has changed his mind. Nkem's breath hitched. Ifeoma blinked. That's impossible. He was excited about this. Chibuzo's mother looked down. That's what we thought too. But suddenly, he refuses to talk about it. He won't even look at Nkem. He just says he doesn't want to go forward with it anymore. Nkem felt as if the ground had been pulled from under her feet. Chibuzo didn't want her anymore. She shook her head. No. That doesn't make sense. I saw him just last week. He wanted this. Chibuzo's mother gave her a sad look. I don't know what happened, my dear. But something changed. Nkem's mind raced. Something changed. Or someone changed it. Her eyes slowly turned to Obinna. He sat under the mango tree, casually peeling an orange, as if he hadn't heard a single word. But when their eyes met, that same slow, knowing smile crept onto his face. And suddenly, Nkem knew. He had done this. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Had Obinna spoken to Chibuzo? Had he threatened him? Lied to him? Whatever he had done, it worked. Chibuzo was gone. Her future, her one chance to escape, was slipping through her fingers. And Obinna knew it. The next day, she couldn't take it anymore. She stormed up to him as he sat outside, weaving a fishing net. What did you do? She demanded. Obinna didn't even look up. Good morning to you too, Nkem. Don't play games with me, she hissed. What did you say to Chibuzo? He calmly tied a knot. Nothing he didn't need to hear. Her chest tightened. Obinna. He sighed, finally looking at her. I did what had to be done. Nkem's fist clenched. You ruined everything. Obinna's face darkened. I protected you. From what? From happiness. From making a mistake, he said sharply. You don't belong with him. Her breath caught. And who do I belong to, Obinna? Silence. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, me. Nkem stepped back as if he had slapped her. His gaze was steady, unshaken. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He meant it. Her stomach twisted. That's not how this works, she whispered. It's the only way it works, he said simply. Nkem shook her head, stepping further away. No. You're sick, Obinna. His jaw tightened. Say what you want. But you're not leaving me. Tears burned her eyes. I hate you. Obinna flinched. But then, just as quickly, his expression hardened again. You can hate me all you want, Nkem. But you're still mine. She turned and ran. For days, she refused to speak to him. She stayed near their mother, near the women in the village, anywhere that kept her from being alone with him. But she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. One night, as she lay awake, staring at the moonlight on the thatched roof, she made a decision. She had to leave. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She couldn't live like this anymore. Silently, she rose from her mat, grabbed a small bundle of clothes, and tiptoed to the door. Her heart pounded. One step. Then another. She reached for the wooden latch. A voice in the darkness. Going somewhere. Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly. Obinna stood in the shadows, arms crossed. Watching. Waiting. You really thought you could leave me, he asked quietly. Tears filled her eyes. Obinna, please. He took a step forward. Go back to bed, Nkem. Her hands trembled. She had never felt more trapped in her life. Nkem knew then she would never be free. Not as long as Obinna was around. She felt like a bird in a cage, her wings clipped before she even had the chance to fly. The next morning, she moved around like a ghost. Her mother hummed as she cooked. Her father sat outside, chewing kola nuts as usual. Life went on, unaware of the storm raging inside her. Obinna acted as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't caught her trying to escape. As if he hadn't stolen her future with Chibuzo. As if he hadn't told her, in the dead of night, that she belonged to him. Nkem wanted to scream. Instead, she picked up a basket and walked toward the stream. If she stayed home, she would suffocate. At the stream, she sat on a rock, staring at the water. Her reflection rippled, broken and unsteady, just like her life. She had no way out. No one to turn to. Or so she thought. A soft voice broke through her thoughts. Nkem. She turned sharply. Chibuzo. Her heart clenched at the sight of him. He looked different. There were dark circles under his eyes, his once bright face now filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Why are you here?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, in a voice filled with regret, he said, "I know what Obinna did." Nkem's breath caught. He looked away. "He came to me that night. Told me things. Lies. But I was weak, Nkem. I let him get into my head." Tears burned her eyes. "Why didn't you fight for me?" Chibuzo swallowed hard. "Because he made me believe that if I did, something terrible would happen." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" Chibuzo finally met her eyes. "Nkem, he threatened me." The world spun around her. She shook her head. "No, he wouldn't." But she knew. She knew. Obinna had always been possessive. Always controlling. But now, it was clear. He was dangerous. That night, Nkem didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had to end this. But how? Running away wouldn't work. He would always find her. Telling her parents. They would never believe her. No one would. She was alone. Except, she wasn't. Chibuzo still cared. And if she could just get away from Obinna for good, she could be free. The next evening, Chibuzo sent a message. "Meet me at the old footpath by the river. After sunset." Nkem's heart pounded. This was it. Her chance. If she didn't take it now, she never would. As the sky turned orange, she made her move. She told her mother she was going to fetch firewood. Her hands trembled as she stepped onto the path, glancing over her shoulder. No sign of Obinna. Good. She quickened her pace. The footpath was quiet, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. Then, a figure stepped out of the darkness. Nkem's heart stopped. "Obinna." She staggered back. "How did you?" His expression was blank. "You really thought I wouldn't know?" Her breath came in sharp gasps. "Obinna, please. Let me go." He took a step forward. "I can't." Tears filled her eyes. "You can't keep me here forever." His eyes darkened. "Watch me." Desperation clawed at her chest. "Chibuzo is waiting for me." Obinna's face twisted. "He won't be waiting anymore." Nkem froze. Something about the way he said it. Cold. Final. Her stomach twisted in fear. "What did you do?" Obinna didn't answer. Nkem pushed past him, running. Her feet pounded against the dirt path, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She reached the riverbank. And screamed. "No. No. No." She dropped to her knees, shaking him. Chibuzo, wake up. All to no avail. Tears blurred her vision. No. This can't be happening. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned, her body shaking. Obinna stood there, his face unreadable. Now do you understand? He asked quietly. Nkem's world crumbled. Her only hope gone. Her last chance at freedom taken. And standing before her, the person who had stolen everything. Her own brother. She finally saw the truth. There was only one way this would end. One of them had to disappear. Forever.